open a book and you open another world, a world that is different and also a world that is the same.
Once you listen, the next progressive step is into books. And then as teachers and educators, you will know what is the appropriate text for that age. You take them through that stage.
And it's a journey of engaging with the author. The author started the book and the reader completes it, right?
I don't think we have any other tool to quieten ourselves today, let's say for 4 hours or 8 hours, except reading.
And as far as reading is concerned, I would take it in 2 stages. One is the early readers, and one is the slightly older kid beyond 8.
Many good speakers are good readers. Reading is like a good dry run for speech and writing.
It's very, very important that we allow for time for reflection in our students. It's incomplete. The reading is incomplete if there is no time for reflection.
We are going to be talking today about something that is of, I think, critical importance to all of us, something that we all need to address with a lot of urgency, which is reading, but not just reading, reading as theater of the mind. This is something, as part of my work, we've been thinking about, talking about. The founder of the firm is here, so this is something we've been, I think, very passionate about ever since it became an idea. And I thought it sort of beautifully connects to the different themes we have been discussing the last 1.5 days. In fact, what struck me most in the 1.5 days of conversations we've all been having is that a panel which was a school leadership panel that was supposed to talk about the future of schooling, where we had school leaders, turned into a panel on mental health. Because just one question changed it all. The question was, what is it that principals have to deal with most or with urgency today? And there were options which included pedagogical intelligence, but I think most of you here picked mental health. In that context, I want to tell you that I read this New Yorker article recently on whether reading can make you happier. And it says, and I think this holds true for all of us here on this panel who are avid readers, that as avid readers, we've been self-medicating ourselves with great books for long. So what we're all going to try and do today is see if we can prescribe, the medication to the people here. So reading is an act of introversion. We all know that. So we're going to talk about going beyond words, going beyond the book, to looking at how reading can shape us. Or in Dr. Mr. G. Balasubramanian's perspective, I would say we want to look at reading with the third eye open. So I would like to start here. I have this august panel of educators in different ways, theater artists, who are also voracious readers. I think that's why a diverse set of, or a motley group of people are sitting on the stage together. I would like to start by asking each of you, before we get into the theater of reading, which is at a way deeper level, which means we are going beyond decoding and comprehension, how do you get a child hooked to reading from your own perspectives? If each of you could talk about it, that would be nice. We could start with Dr. Annie.
Okay, thank you, Preetika. Now, how I look at reading is reading to make a larger meaning, an overall meaning. And to me, meaning means making sense of the world that we are living in. So what I used to tell my children when they were growing up was, open a book and you open another world, a world that is different and also a world that is the same. So draw parallel instances. The experiences that the book opens up could be experiences that you would have experienced, or you would have seen someone else, or you would have read of others experiencing it. So draw parallels. And to my surprise, it really worked, because when they opened up a book, they told me the stories. there was a narrative that was there in their minds, and the narrative continued. So there was a dialoguing, there was some kind of an interaction between me and my children. This is the same concept that I have put in to my degree students in college, where I tell them it's a different world, but it is also the same world. Because we all of us human beings are one and the same, and our experiences are pretty much the same. Take literature from the 15th century, or let's say even the 11th century. It's the same, because human beings haven't really changed. We love, we hate, we are jealous, we are envious, we are the same. So experiences are the same, and it is a world that we relate to and we experience. So it is this world, opening up of the world to make better sense of it, to understand, to create. And I was also thinking of this concept of synergizing, synergy. It's no longer 2 plus 2 makes 4, but 2 plus 2 can make 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever. So in other words, you are mediating with the book. The reader mediates with the book in order to create something new. So I'm not looking at accuracy, I'm not looking at the absolute meaning that the writer intended. Forget about that. Think out of the box. Can you create a new meaning with what is already there? And it works. It really works. And I suppose that has been an exciting journey for me, my children, and my students. This opening up of a new world, which is also the same world. So there are this constant mediation between the reader and what is being read. And that is the most exciting part of reading as an active skill, which goes much beyond comprehension.
Thank you, Dr. Annie, and may I have Mr. Radhakrishnan share his views on how do we get a child hooked to reading. We are all, a bunch of reading enthusiasts here who are, sitting on this panel. But I may just love to play, I may want to become a sports person. Why is it that we want to privilege reading, over all of this? So how do you get a child hooked if I'm not a reader, by my aptitude?
Thanks, Preetika. I grew up in a very sort of traditional family in the sense, and reading for me started with listening to stories by my grandparents. That was my first step. That led to a sort of inquisitive state of mind which said, where are these stories coming from? These stories can't emerge from the air. There has to be a basis. So it came from books. My grandmother read me books, albeit in Tamil, but still, the concept was that she read to me, and that led me to read books. So I think it's easier if we start young children with reading to them and then get them hooked on reading themselves. It's very important to note what you want the child to read in today's context and where you want the children to read from. Do you want them to read from devices? Do you want them to read from the print media? There are several options available today, and the digital world as such, Preetika, is bottomless and it's topless. It's such a vast media that you don't want to push young children into that in a very premature stage. So what has to happen is reading is, I would say, a skill, rather not an art, but a skill to be developed, to be taught. So in order to do that, you have to take it stage by stage. And the first stage, of course, is to listen. That is what children go through. So once you listen, the next progressive step is into books. And then as teachers and educators, you will know what is the appropriate text for that age. You take them through that stage. And collective reading, discussion about what you read, even if they are 5-year-olds, if all of them sit together and read, and each of them express their thoughts on what they read and share the experiences of what they read, you will find that each child gives you a different perspective. And that is what will kindle them to go ahead and read that again or read another book.
I think that's so very well put that, listening is sort of the starting point for reading, and I think it is hugely undermined today. We think, if you have to get a child to read, you have to take the child to print directly. In fact, not just to get a child hooked, but even if you have to help a child with the skill of reading, a child, I think tends to predict better when they've listened to a word first, if they've heard a word first before having, even encountering the word as print or text. So I think that's a very interesting point. But I'm going to sort of now ask, Mr. Levi Paulos, it's wonderful to say we want to read to our children, but we all do not have the gift of the voice that my co-panelists here who are voice actors have. And I have Mr. Paulos, who actually works with rural children and first generation children. So how do you get them hooked? I don't have a parent who can, read to me. I don't have a literate parent. So how would you address that?
Thank you for the opportunity here. And I would really just agree completely with the first way to hook kids to reading is definitely by reading to them. And as parents, it's more important than as teachers. It should start with the parents doing it. But very often we kind of feel that it's been a success when you read the story and the kid is able to understand it and even summarize it. But really, it's about being able to respond to the story. And that's, we give our teachers a book every year and we ask them to read it. And at the end of the year, we ask them to submit a document, which is not a summary of the book, but a response to the book, which is exactly what we need to do to hook them to reading, because it needs to allow for the students to think. And it's a journey of engaging with the author. The author started the book and the reader completes it, right? What we do in ACH is, because we have a large number of students, over 50% coming from BPL strata of the economy. And so they're first generation learners, they come together, and we have the other group of people who are from suburban demographics. So there is no common denominator. One guy is reading a book and he's trying to explain to his peer in this reading clubs about how is it that an ox can be used to plow in a field, and then the other guy is talking about a beef steak. So it's very different. Both have different worldviews and different vantage points from which they come, and they're trying to explain it to the other person, which gets so exciting because you would think because they're two different communities would be hard to mingle, but in the context of reading, it's so natural because that one person who knows so well about a good steak is explaining the beauty of it and how wonderful it is, and the other guy is talking about how an ox can plow a field, and he's seen it, and both have different experiences. So reading a book really forms the worldview, and as principals, as educators, we must understand that our community today needs that level of reflection. Reading allows for you to kind of soften your disagreements and allow you to appreciate the other point of view, be more compassionate, and you allow for a worldview to be adjusted, and you use that lens to see and relate with each other. That's part of a development, a life skill that a book offers. If you're not reading, you cannot build a reader. Yeah, and then with that, yeah.
With that, I think I'm going to ask my colleagues to put up a poll about reading. We just wanted to find out how many of us read, what are our, reading patterns like. So there is a question on, how many books we read in a week, in a month, or do we read at all? So can we have the poll go up before I go to Ms. Lakshmi Vikram here? So you can respond on Mentimeter. This can't be your textbook. That cannot be counted. It has to be out of syllabus entirely. Yeah. Any print. So the operative word is honesty there. So, yeah, we have about 80 plus people who have actually submitted their responses. So the WhatsApp message is the leader. So, like one of my co-panelists just said, if we do not read ourselves, how do we build a community of readers, and take them to the kind of levels we're talking about? When you talk about reading as theater of mind, Mr. Paulos spoke of empathy. If I'm right? If I get into the shoes of a character, reading a book can be used as an empathy tool, as, your empathy lab. Your library can become your empathy lab. Now I'm going to take this question to Ms. Lakshmi Vikram, who's raised a reader, and the reader is right here, who's raised a precocious reader. So how do you get a kid hooked to reading, and how do we scale it? Because in your case, I see a very enthusiastic, raising a reader raising another reader. So how would you get a child hooked?
Thanks for having me here, Preetika, Mr. Vishwanath, Shobha ma'am, and the entire Kardipat team. Yes, as you all know, I've been reading to Vanya. We've been reading to Vanya from the time she was 3 months old. So I think this is the best time to be born, wherein there are a lot of picture books around. And I think we stopped reading the novels and all that, and we read only picture books now. Because not only the Indian publishers' books, the ones here in Chennai, Kaddi Tales, Tulika books, Tara books, and you're also aware of Pratham books. So there are umpteen number of picture books around. So that itself will definitely draw the children to reading, because it's so colorful and it's on different subjects. Maybe you feel when you read to them, they may not understand, but they do. And they may not show it to you then. At a later stage, at some point or the other, you will think that there is no empathy in my child. And when I say I'm not well and she doesn't say anything. So, but there is empathy. When that happens not only because of the parenting, but because of reading mainly. And as far as reading is concerned, I would take it in 2 stages. One is the early readers, and one is the slightly older kid, beyond 8. So you say you missed the bus, right? So if you're 8 years old, beyond that, it's very difficult to get the child to read. So at early stage, yes, as I said, I started to read to her from the time she was 3 months old, but there are mothers now who read to their children when they are expecting the child itself. So that definitely, when you research and see, there is, a lot of benefits in that, where the child understands a lot of things. And as Mr. Radhakrishnan said, I believe in this listening, speaking, then reading, and then writing. So I think Vanya has reached all the 4 stages, and now she's in the stage of writing now. So, and listening, yes, when the parents speak any language. In our case, we took a conscious decision wherein I will speak in our mother tongue, Telugu, and my husband will speak in English to her. So that has helped. So when she was even 2 years old, so when she used to like milk a lot, so the doctors told us to restrict the quantity. So we used to, say MILK, don't give MILK now. But she knew it was milk. That was when she was hardly 2. And then we started with the audiobooks. So audiobooks helps a lot. It's not necessary there should be a screen where the child should see the cartoon and all that. Audiobook, it's been on a repeat mode. The children like that repetition wherein you read the same book over and over again. So we were playing the same audiobook over and over again. She was all of 3 when she narrated the entire story of Kutti and the Mouse. So with all actions and everything, but she never saw a video of it. She only heard the, the story. Like you have the cane sound at the turn of every page. So she only heard the story a number of times, but she was able to narrate the whole story when she was 3. And same way at different age levels, then comes the image reading. So as you keep reading to the child, the parents keep reading to the child, the image, the repetition they know page after page what line comes there. Not necessary they should have known phonics or they should have known how to read. But they can read on their own. That again, Vanya has proved that. So she read the book. It was image reading. Then after that comes the actual reading when, they've learned the alphabet and they know how the sentence is formed and all that. Then comes the actual reading. But when they read so much, the words they use and in their daily conversations, it improves their vocabulary. You asked why they should read. Why not sports? Yes, she is also into sports. She can also get into dance. She can also sing. All that is fine. But wherever you go, you need to speak well. You need to be able to present yourself. And you need to be able to get your point across. Whatever you are, you do. Whichever field you're going to shine in. For that, reading is definitely necessary. Like the other day, Mr. Levi was telling, there is a lot of difference between when he interviews people, the person who is read and who is not read. Definitely, yes. It's like when, if Vanya is hungry, she doesn't say, Mama, I'm hungry. She says, Mama, I'm ravenous. I'm famished. So, every time I need to look into the dictionary to find out what the meaning is, she has read so much. So they are able to register the situation where the story is set in, and they want to use those words in their vocabulary. So it comes naturally. The reading comes naturally, and then the writing also comes naturally. So I feel as parents are the first teachers, parents should spend more time reading to the child every day. This is what I feel.
Thank you, Lakshmi. I think you've covered several important points. I don't know if we, sort of noticed that right from the parental engagement required to build a reader and how, reading can becoming a fascinating experience with the parent coming into the picture. And starting with an audiobook and the entire journey of reading, how you could start with an audiobook where listening informs reading. You were sort of starting with, LSR, and then you're telling me how you're building visual literacy in a certain way by reading pictures. I don't have to necessarily read text to read words, and then go back and when you said, your daughter says, Vanya says, ravenous, I'm ravenous, that's actually reading informing speech. In fact, many good speakers are good readers. Reading is like a good dry run for speech and writing. Right, so it's sort of holistic activity. It's not even like L leads to, SR, and R sort of informs S back, because it's the expressions that we pick up when we read that we start using in our regular conversations. Now, I would like to just take this to the next level of, yes, we're getting the child hooked, but most of us see it as, an activity that is required maybe to, it's an important habit to be developed in a child. Just expose the child to different worlds or create different knowledge systems for the child, or help a child read to help the child in academics, perhaps. But can we bring, a perspective that is a learning perspective to reading, going beyond a comprehension perspective to reading, that there is meaning making, but how do I bring a learning perspective that is reading, sort of develops me as a human being in many ways, right? It helps me form my opinions. It brings in discernment. So how would you like to look at theater of the mind? How have you engaged? We have, panelists who do physical theater, who are experts in it. How would you talk about reading and the theater of the mind?
The basic thing that we all have to look at is all students are readers. Everyone has to read before you can comprehend. The second step is, after comprehension, is to analyze and form opinions. What reading does for children, or in fact for most of us as adults, is to try and give us a very different dimension. When the author says, it was cool outside, it is you who determines how cool it is. Whether you're wearing a sweater, wearing a jacket, or going out in a t-shirt, because that's relative. When the author says that it was a beautiful garden, what do you imagine? It's your mind that imagines a row of roses or even an apple orchard. So what does reading do? It allows your imagination to go wild, to go far, and go far away and kind of decipher what you want to understand from it. Now, another dimension of reading, when Preetika was talking about theater of the mind, we as theater artists, the first thing, or rather I would want to bring it to myself rather than generalize all actors, is the first thing that I do as a theater actor is to read my script once. The second time I read it, I try to read the story behind the script. The third time I read it, I try to read my character in the story. The fourth time I read it is when I try to place myself in the character, to say how I would approach that character. So this involves everything there is to cover in reading. And reading brings another dimension. Preetika, I'll take just one more minute. Reading brings another dimension, is it creates sort of a Socrates kind of thinking. It pushes you to be inquisitive. It pushes you to question. The moment you question, the next logical step is to find an answer. And finding an answer is basically research. So how do you think these great researchers got there? It's because of extensive reading, analyzing, questioning, and that brings research. Research, again, brings text on what was researched and published. And that published text is again read. So it's a cycle. That's how you evolve intelligence. So it all begins with reading.
I think that is a very interesting point, on how, if I may sort of sum it up, just keeping in mind what we try to develop in our schools, we try to develop fluency first, right, which is decoding the text. So, I read somewhere that a fluent reader is a speed reader, and if you're a slow reader, then you're a scholar. So I sort of, try to think of it because it's a very important skill to develop what we call as regressions in reading. That is, you go back and come, you're supposed to regress. We're not supposed to give a text and tell a child, make sense of it and I take the book out. We need to maybe develop strategies for regressions, which is, I go read it once, it makes sense to me, I go read it again, not just before a play, but I think throughout your life, because what Shakespeare meant to me 20 years ago or 25 years ago is very different from what Shakespeare means to me today. You sort of live with the book, you evolve meaning. So I think that's a very interesting idea that, we need to provide that space for regressions. And how you people the world with your world, right? That there is a beach, what exactly is in the beach is actually peopled by all of us. I think that is theater of the mind. It's very active. And I think as a theater actor, you would also hear the voices when you read. It sort of plays up for you. I found that very interesting. And I think we'll have Dr. Rani Kurechan take over from there because she does theater too.
Yes, listening to voices. I don't know whether it happens to everybody, but it definitely happens to me. I hear these voices in my mind, and more so when I'm reading a story, a narrative. So I try to listen to those people, the chatter upstairs, and for me, that is what is the theater of the mind, where the imagination takes over and you create a world, a parallel world in your mind, and then you try to create your own narrative. So this has been, I've tried this out in my classes, and there was a third-year student who did her research in reading habits, inculcating reading habits among students, because we took a survey among our students, first years, second years, and third years, and the reading habit was absolutely abysmal. And more so because of the pandemic. Nobody wanted to read anymore, but everybody was interested in watching. And then she and I worked together and we created solutions. There were two solutions that we thought of. One was creating a reading space. Now, when we talk about reading space, it's not just physical space, it's the cognitive space, the contextual space, and also the physical space. So when we talk about contextual space, it is the context, the reading material. How familiar are the students with what they're reading? Have they seen daffodils? Have they seen anything else? Have they seen windmills? What are they reading about? Are they able to relate? Are they able to understand? So therefore, we thought of bringing in Ponniyin Selvan, because that was one big thing. There was a film that was released. The whole society was reading or listening. So we thought of bringing in that. We thought of bringing in the great leaders of Tamil Nadu. Contextual reading that is very familiar with the readers. Simple, very well written, lucidly written, and it was wonderful. It was an eye-opener where basic level proficiency students could read and they could contribute. So we had a text about the Pongal festival, and there were readers who contributed so much more than what the text had to offer. So this was reading, listening to others, and also speaking. So as Preetika mentioned, it's a very integrated kind of a skill. It is not watertight, it's not compartmentalized, it cannot be compartmentalized. It's an integrated, it is jumbled up. So if you read, you can listen, you can speak, you can write, you can do everything together. That's what Lakshmi said, and she's proved it with her experiment. I've worked with that as well. Now, I've also, my referral point is Roland Barthes, who said that when a book is in print, when a book is in a public domain, it spells the death of the author and the birth of the reader. I believe firmly in that. So we don't really have to, as teachers or as parents, we don't have to be bogged down by accuracy or authorial intention. We need to specify, we need to bring forward the narrative that is reconstructed, that is deconstructed and reconstructed forever and ever. So let us also believe in the reception theory, the reader response theory. The reader who is the one who makes meaning, and that meaning has to be given primordial importance. So let's not be bogged down by the accuracy or the absolute meaning. There is no one single meaning. We are in the post-modern world, and there are multiple truths, there are multiple meanings, and we need to be aware of that.
Thank you, Dr. Annie. I think you brought in a very important point about ambiguity. They say the more a child is exposed to ambiguity, the better decision makers they will become, because you're dealing with ambiguity, open-endedness, I can predict the plot in 4 different ways, and I'm predicting as I'm reading. Though I'm not sure I'm going to completely agree with the idea of the death of the author, because we're able to do this only with a few authors, right? If it's a great writer, like, if you're looking at a Harry Potter, with Rowling you can do it, because it's Rowling who created a book of this kind. And there are books that come and go and we don't even reread them. So I'm sure there are some books and great children's literature too that lend themselves to this interplay that the reader brings to the book, perhaps there. But I think this whole idea of ambiguity, that it's open-ended, is an extremely important skill for the child to pick up. That you're not learning only for academics, you're not reading just for that. That reading is a very nuanced tool to make NEP happen, if I may say that, I'm going to ask Mrs. Lakshmi to talk about what theatre of the mind means to you, Lakshmi. How would you think of theatre of the mind vis-a-vis reading?
Okay, I would say when the child reads, they are totally transported to a different world, a magical world. They are one with the character, they are in that setting, and You know, and they, like, I've seen Vanya again, I'm quoting her again. So she becomes the character. Sometimes she would have said something. I used to wonder why she spoke like this. Then after some time, I realized, because I can't read all the books that's there, that she has read. So then I realized, okay, so, you know, that this has happened in that story. So in context, so they're able to use those words and they're able to become the character in the right context. Maybe the child would have, you know, the character would have said something to the mom, and then, you know, that's how she speaks to me. So then I realized, okay, so she's picked it up from there. But at the right context, they'll be able to use those phrases. So I guess, you know, whatever happens in the play, the characters, the, you know, the script and everything is in those descriptive passages in the book, wherein the child is able to visualize, just as when you're watching a play, where we are able to visualize how what the character is doing and where the story is set and all that. The same thing even the book brings. So reading more definitely transports them to a different world, like how they say, you know, a picture is equal to 1,000 words. Here, the 1,000 words make an image for the child. They're able to, you know, totally transform to a fantasy world. Or, you know, some stories are set in the real, you know, situations. They're able to connect. So I feel the theater of mind to reading, yes, that is how I see it.
That's very well put, I would say. You know, we always talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words, but give the child 1,000 words and, you know, the ability of reading is make the picture in your mind and you're visualizing. And not only am I, you know, taking it to the visual, but I also think, you know, we had a panel yesterday on the algorithm of learning. You also move into levels of abstraction and how do I think in abstraction, think, you know, conceptually, because at some level you even move higher than the picture. So I think that's extremely well put. And, you know, I'm sure there's a lot that role playing, you know, does too. Yes, yes.
Yeah, talking about this abstraction, I mean, it's not just English. I've tried this, trying to teach the theater of the mind. I've suddenly been, I mean, that flash of thought came in. Teaching arithmetic to my children. I mean, it's arithmetic, math is a very, very abstract concept, as abstract as language. How do I concretize it? So, teaching them addition and subtraction, I created a narrative. Okay, it's your birthday, Papa has got you 10 chocolates, you give one, and I bought chocolates, made it, concretized it, so they could see what is addition, what is subtraction. So concretizing, that is where theater of the mind, even for something like as abstract as arithmetic or math.
And that's very interesting, and I think that's what NEP is expecting us to do. You know, when they ask us to do math integration, or you're looking at reading, you're not doing reading for your English class, but you're using reading as a skill that can determine, you know, your overall learning journey. I think that is very interesting. So I'm going to now ask, you know, Mr. Levi Paulos, that we all know that reading is a lonely act, and yet not so lonely. So how would you talk about that in terms of what happens to us when we read?
Yeah, it's a powerhouse. Reading is a powerhouse to transform you and the society. You know, in most cases, we talked about this even yesterday, I think. When we talk to people, when someone is talking to me, I am battling in my mind to form a response. Sometimes not a verbal one, but even a gesture. So you're not really reflecting on it. So reading allows you to learn. So you have time to reread, regression like you spoke about. You have time to just evaluate what the author is saying and time to learn and respond to it, which really is what you need. Because even in the classroom, when you are being taught, you really kind of have no time to reflect because the information is just pouring in. But when you're reading, that's different. When you're reading, it's different because you have time to pause at each teachable moment, even in a story, which is why it's important to even, as a father or as a mother, as a teacher, when you read stories, it's very important to answer questions. You know, there'll be questions like, why is this tale longer than the other tale? It could be as simple as that, but you got to answer them. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. You know, we spoke about that yesterday too. But it's important to allow every thread of thought to kind of continue and let that string be there. And later, they would construct a knowledge based on the information they just received in the process of reading. So even connecting to mental health, you know, reading allows you to kind of quieten yourself because it's when you're alone or when you've been spoken to or when you've been in a circumstance that really took you out of your comfort zone and you're not anymore comfortable or peaceful, and you read. You know, you go at one page after the other page, and I'm telling you, if you, and I know there are about 30 people who reads a book a month. I hope you make it way more than that. Because as an educator, if you don't do it, we can't expect our societies to experience that transformation that reading can bring about. It's very, very important that we allow for time for reflection in our students. It's incomplete. The reading is incomplete if there is no time for reflection. There is no full benefit of reading if there is no debrief, if there is no time for response. If you don't ask a child, what did you read, or if you don't tell your peer about what you read, your reading is incomplete. You know, talk about what you read. The 30 people who have read a book a month here, talk about the peer. It really completes your reading. So it's important that you kind of build on reading or take the reading to completion by doing that.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you, first spoke of reading as an activity to quieten ourselves. I don't think we have any other tool to quieten ourselves today, let's say for 4 hours or 8 hours, except reading. See, unless you have access to seriously high-order spiritual resources, even there you can get into meditation for maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes at best as an advanced meditator. But if you get your child hooked onto reading, I think 4 hours, if you become a binge reader, all night you're going to be reading. And you're just quietening yourself. And it's only when we quieten ourselves, I think, I completely agree with you, Mr. Levi, that we even begin to pause and reflect. I don't think any of us have time for it because we have so much clutter, not just, visually we live in a very loud culture, but there's so much of clutter of thoughts because there's so much information. And there's WhatsApp, most of us, WhatsApp is created as an addictive tool. That's why the creators of WhatsApp do not use WhatsApp. Every 2 minutes I have to keep checking it, right? It's made to be that. That's why we keep checking for notifications. So there is nothing, I don't know if any of us here even has a tool that can quieten ourselves and move us into reflection, like reading or what the books can do. And I really like it that how you reflect and then get into a conversation. We don't do that either today. We just talk. And there's chatter and there's clutter. And most often when we talk to each other, I think we're already formulating our responses while the other person is talking. We're not listening. So it's very interesting that reading keeps you not only reflective and gives you that, that space, meditative space, if I may say that. It informs listening, therefore, like how reading informs speech. You can become better listeners if you're good readers. If you've sat with the book for 8 hours, if you've done binge reading of fiction, especially fiction, they say, it's great, medical prescription we can give for, all the mental health issues we are dealing with. It can just make you a better listener. So, just the way these skills come together is very important. Not just talk about them as LSRW in the class as though these are watertight compartments. Yeah, there's no rigidity in that. So with these great ideas, what I'm going to do now is, open the floor, some questions. We have a question from Ms. Meeta Venkatesh here. Before that, I just want to add very quickly, I remember, I was in a school and I was asking grade 2 kids what they were reading. And they were reading Geronimo Stilton. And I asked the teacher whether she's read the books. She's never read the books. I would say, please go pick up Harry Potter and read it. Every school teacher has to read Harry Potter. We cannot say, I will not be reading what my child is reading. We should be reading contemporary literature, contemporary fiction. Then maybe we will know to correlate. We'll be able to say that the real and this come together. We'll be able to see the relevance. So I think we should all be reading what is in. You know, how many of us read children's literature, you know, and how many of us who even know who the children's laureate is now. So I think that's very important too. I think we'll go to Ms.
So
Meeta
actually,
Venkatesh.
mine is not a question. It's a comment to add on. We spoke about many aspects of reading and the learning and the peace. I wanted to talk about the sheer joy of the written word, because it's so joyous to read. And when you read, yes, Harry Potter I have read and enjoyed. Enjoyed because it presents another world. So what if it isn't our world? And when we all were young, we read Enid Blyton, which we didn't, in those days, we didn't understand what that world is, but we enjoyed it. But I wanted to share actually one quote, which Jane Austen made, and maybe many of you are familiar with it. When she spoke about her book, in that context, she said, her book Emma, she said, a good book when you read it, when you revisit, you get, the joy you get out of it is not like a arithmetic progression. It's like a geometric progression. Each time you visit, you get so much more joy, it multiplies. And that is what I think reading means to us. Thank you.
I think that's very well said about, I think, how reading for pleasure is very important, and that takes us
Preetika,
to critical thinking.
Preetika, can I just say something?
Yes, please,
You know, that's a very important aspect that you mentioned. As a 15-year-old, when I read Pride and Prejudice the first time, the opening, Mrs. Bennet, I hated her. How can a woman be interested only in getting her daughters married? When I was 40 and seeking alliance, no, 50, when I was seeking alliance for my daughters, I read Pride and Prejudice again accidentally, and I was sympathetic. Sure, I was Mrs. Bennet. I loved her. That is reception theory for me.
You have a
Hi. Yeah, actually, after seeing that score on the Mentimeter, like this is a gathering of educators, and seeing so many people, the majority of the people do not read. So that actually made me really wonder, as educators, if we are not into the habit of reading, how do we motivate our children to read in the first place? Secondly, actually, I work with children with dyslexia and learning disabilities. So these are the children whom we cannot blame for not reading, because that is primarily their difficulty. So what we came up with is, like the whole class reads, first we make them master the symbols. And then once the whole class reads, we call it picture at punctuation. So the moment there is a punctuation mark, the child stops, and then they close their eyes and they visualize what they have read. And once they visualize, they go into that theater, that drama of reading, you know, they picturize everything, and the whole world becomes so colorful and three-dimensional. And that develops a real love of reading in children. Thank you.
I'm going to give the last word to Mr. Levi to wrap up the theater of the mind.
If you can understand that reading takes you to places and paints pictures in your mind about the author and allows you to reflect and become a better learner, understand reading as the theater of mind, you would be hooked forever, and you will love to read. And that should be the state of an educator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the very diverse ideas and very relevant ideas you brought to the session today. Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you, Dr. Rani. Thank you, Mr. Radhakrishnan. Thank you, Mr. Levi.